There comes a moment in your life, quiet, almost invisible, when something inside you shifts. It rarely happens in a loud or dramatic way. There is no clear announcement, no obvious breaking point that forces you to stop and face the truth. Instead, it begins as a quiet feeling, something subtle that you cannot fully explain. You might be sitting alone, replaying conversations in your mind, or noticing small patterns that once felt normal but now seem different. At first, you try to brush it off, convincing yourself that it is nothing, that you are just being sensitive or overthinking. But the feeling does not leave. It lingers. You begin to notice the little things. The way they respond to you becomes shorter, less engaged, almost distracted. The way they listen feels incomplete, as if they are present physically but absent mentally. You start to sense a shift in energy, something you cannot see but can deeply feel. It is not about one specific action. It is about a pattern that slowly reveals itself over time. There are moments when you share something important, something that matters to you, and it is met with indifference. Not necessarily cruelty, not even rejection, but something more subtle and, in many ways, more painful: lack of care. It is in these moments that the quiet realization begins to take shape. You start asking yourself questions you once avoided. Why does it feel like I am the only one trying? Why do I feel unseen, even when I am right here? Still, you hesitate to accept it. You search for reasons to explain their behavior. Maybe they are tired. Maybe they are dealing with something you do not understand. Maybe this is just a phase. You hold on to these possibilities because they feel safer than the truth. Accepting the truth means facing the discomfort of what it implies, and that is not easy. But the feeling grows stronger. It shows up in your silence, in the pauses between conversations, in the moments when you expect warmth but receive distance instead. It is not loud, yet it is persistent. It begins to change the way you see things. Situations that once felt normal now feel one-sided. Effort that once felt balanced now feels uneven. You start to observe more carefully, not with suspicion, but with awareness. You notice how easily your presence is overlooked, how quickly your efforts are taken for granted. You realize that you are adjusting yourself more and more, trying to maintain something that no longer feels mutual. And deep inside, there is a quiet voice that begins to speak, even if you are not ready to fully listen. That voice does not shout. It does not accuse. It simply points out what is already there. It reminds you of how you feel when you are around them, compared to how you feel when you are at peace with yourself. It highlights the contrast without forcing a decision. It allows you to see clearly, even if clarity feels uncomfortable. This realization is not immediate acceptance. It is a process, a gradual unfolding of truth that cannot be rushed. You may go back and forth, questioning your perception, doubting your instincts, but each time you return to that quiet feeling, it becomes a little clearer, a little harder to ignore. There is no single moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, there are many small moments that come together, forming a picture you can no longer deny. And even though it is quiet, even though it lacks drama, it carries a weight that is deeply real. It is the kind of awareness that changes something within you, even before you decide what to do about it. Excuses rarely appear as excuses in the moment. They feel reasonable, even comforting. They give you something to hold onto when reality begins to feel uncertain. Instead of facing what is in front of you, your mind starts to soften the truth. reshaping it into something easier to accept. You begin to explain their behavior in ways that protect the connection. Even if it comes at the cost of your own clarity, you tell yourself they are just busy, that their silence is not intentional, just a result of too many responsibilities. When their tone changes, you assume they must be tired or dealing with something personal. When they forget something important to you, you convince yourself it was an honest mistake. Each explanation feels logical on its own, and because of that, it becomes easier to overlook the pattern forming beneath it all. Over time, these small justifications begin to stack on top of each other. One excuse leads to another, creating a layer between you and the truth. You are no longer responding to what is actually happening. You are responding to the version of reality you have created to avoid discomfort. It becomes less about their actions and more about how well you can reinterpret those actions in a way that feels less painful. There is also a quiet fear behind these excuses, a fear of what it might mean if you stop making them. Because if you remove all the explanations, if you strip everything down to what is actually happening, you are left with something much harder to accept. You are left with the possibility that they simply do not value you the way you hoped they did. And that realization carries a weight that most people try to avoid for as long as possible. So instead of facing it, you adjust yourself. You become more patient, more understanding, more willing to overlook things that once mattered to you. You lower your expectations not because you truly believe they should be lower, but because it feels easier than confronting the truth. You begin to normalize behavior that once would have felt unacceptable, slowly redefining what you consider to be okay. At the same time, a subtle conflict starts to grow within you. On one side, there is the version of reality you are creating through your excuses. On the other side, there is the quiet feeling that something is not right. This conflict does not always show itself clearly. Sometimes it appears as restlessness, sometimes as overthinking, sometimes as a sense of emotional exhaustion you cannot fully explain. You may find yourself replaying conversations, trying to understand what really happened versus what you told yourself happened. You question your own perception, wondering if you are being unfair or too sensitive. This self-doubt becomes part of the cycle, making it even easier to continue justifying their behavior instead of addressing it. The more you rely on excuses, the more disconnected you become from your own intuition. That inner voice, the one that quietly recognizes truth, begins to fade into the background, not because it is gone, but because it is being overshadowed by the constant effort to reinterpret reality. You are no longer fully listening to how something makes you feel. You are analyzing it, reshaping it, and minimizing it. And yet, despite all the explanations, the feeling does not completely disappear. It remains underneath everything, steady and persistent. No matter how many reasons you create, there is still a part of you that senses the imbalance. A part of you that knows you are giving more than you are receiving, even if you are not ready to fully admit it. Excuses can delay the truth, but they cannot erase it. They can make things feel manageable for a while, but they do not change what is actually happening. And the longer you hold on to them, the more you distance yourself from the clarity that is trying to emerge within you. There is a quiet misunderstanding that many people carry within them, often without realizing it. It is the belief that their value can be measured by how others treat them. When someone gives attention, appreciation, or affection, it feels like confirmation of worth. And when that same attention fades or becomes inconsistent, it begins to feel like something within you has changed, as if your value has somehow decreased. This belief does not form overnight. It is built slowly, through experiences, through interactions, through moments where validation from others feels rewarding and comforting. Over time, you begin to associate how you are treated with who you are. If someone listens to you, you feel important. If someone ignores you, you begin to question your importance. Without noticing, your sense of self starts to depend on something outside of you. When you encounter someone who does not value you the way you expected, this belief becomes even stronger. Instead of seeing their behavior as a reflection of their own limitations, you turn inward and begin to analyze yourself. You ask questions that slowly chip away at your confidence. What did I do wrong? Why am I not enough? What should I change so they can see my worth? These questions feel natural, but they are rooted in a misunderstanding. They assume that your worth is something that needs to be proven, adjusted, or earned. They place you in a position where you feel responsible for how someone else perceives you. And in doing so, they create a cycle where you are constantly trying to become more acceptable in the eyes of another person. As this cycle continues, you may begin to change parts of yourself, not in a way that feels authentic, but in a way that feels strategic. You speak differently, act differently, hold back certain thoughts, or exaggerate others, all in an effort to be seen in a better light. You start to shape yourself around what you believe will make you more valued, even if it means moving further away from who you truly are. At the same time, there is a quiet truth that remains unchanged. Regardless of how someone treats you, your value does not increase when someone appreciates you, and it does not decrease when someone overlooks you. It exists independently, steady, and unaffected by external opinions. But this truth can be difficult to hold on to when your experiences seem to suggest otherwise. The challenge is not that your value is unclear. The challenge is that your attention is directed outward instead of inward. When you focus on how others respond to you, you begin to use their behavior as a mirror. But that mirror is often distorted. It reflects their perspective, their priorities, their limitations, not your true worth. There are many reasons why someone may fail to value you. They may not recognize what you offer. They may be focused on their own needs. They may lack the awareness or capacity to appreciate what is in front of them. None of these reasons define you, yet it is easy to internalize them as if they do. When you begin to separate your worth from how you are treated, something shifts. You start to observe rather than absorb. Instead of immediately turning inward with self-doubt, you allow yourself to see the situation more clearly. You recognize that someone's inability to value you is not evidence of your lack, but a reflection of their perspective. This does not mean you become indifferent or disconnected. It means you become grounded. You no longer feel the need to constantly prove yourself or seek validation in every interaction. There is a quiet stability that comes from understanding that your value is not something to be negotiated or confirmed by others. It is something that remains, regardless of who recognizes it and who does not. There is a point where understanding alone is no longer enough. You may see clearly what is happening. You may recognize the imbalance, and you may even accept the truth within yourself. But none of that changes your reality unless it is followed by action. And this is where self-respect begins to reveal its true meaning. Self-respect is not a feeling that simply appears when things are going well. It is not something that depends on comfort or ease. It is something that is practiced, especially in moments where it would be easier to ignore it. It asks something of you. It asks you to respond differently, even when your emotions pull you in the opposite direction. There is often a strong attachment that keeps you in place. It can be emotional, familiar, or even hopeful. A part of you may still want things to work, still want the connection to return to what it once felt like, or what you imagined it could be. This attachment can make inaction feel safer than action. It creates hesitation, a pause that stretches longer than it should. In that hesitation, you may continue to tolerate small things, disrespect that is subtle, effort that is inconsistent, communication that lacks care. None of these moments may seem big enough on their own to justify a strong response, but together they create a pattern that slowly erodes your sense of self. And the longer you remain in that pattern, the more normal it begins to feel. Taking action in this situation does not always mean confrontation. It does not require loud words or dramatic exits. Often, it is much quieter than that. It is the decision to no longer accept what you once tolerated. It is the shift in how you respond, the boundaries you begin to hold, and the space you choose to create. This can feel uncomfortable at first. When you stop overextending yourself, it may feel unfamiliar. When you no longer chase or explain, it may feel like you are doing less than before. But in reality, you are doing something far more difficult. You are choosing alignment over attachment. You are choosing truth over temporary comfort. There is also a discipline involved in this process, not the kind that is forced, but the kind that is steady. It is the discipline to remain consistent with your standards, even when there is a temptation to fall back into old patterns. It is the discipline to remember what you deserve, even when part of you wants to settle for less. You may feel moments of doubt. You may question whether you are being too distant or too firm. These thoughts are natural, especially if you are used to prioritizing others over yourself. But self-respect does not come from constantly adjusting to make others comfortable. It comes from honoring what you know to be right for you, even when it is not understood by everyone. As you begin to act differently, you also begin to see things more clearly. You notice how people respond to your boundaries. You notice who respects the space you create and who resists it. These observations are not meant to judge others, but to give you insight into what aligns with you and what does not. Action creates clarity. It turns understanding into something real. Without it, awareness remains incomplete. With it, your decisions start to reflect your values instead of your fears. And even though it may feel difficult in the beginning, there is quiet strength that develops when your actions begin to match your self-respect. There is a subtle but powerful shift that begins the moment you stop looking outward for validation and start turning inward instead. For a long time, your focus may have been on how others see you, how they respond to you, and whether they acknowledge your presence or your effort. That focus creates a constant state of waiting for approval, waiting for recognition, waiting for a sign that you are enough. But when you begin to choose yourself, that waiting slowly disappears. You no longer measure your worth by someone else's attention. You no longer feel the need to explain your value or prove your place in someone's life. Instead, you begin to recognize that your energy, your time, and your presence are already meaningful without needing confirmation from outside. This shift is not always dramatic. It often begins in small, quiet decisions. You start saying no to things that drain you, even if you once said yes out of habit. You stop overextending yourself to maintain connections that feel one-sided. You allow yourself to stack without guilt, creating space where there was once constant effort. At the same time, your relationship with yourself begins to change. You start listening more closely to how you feel instead of dismissing it. You pay attention to what brings you peace and what creates tension. This awareness guides your choices, helping you move toward what supports you and away from what does not. There is also a sense of stability that begins to form, not because everything around you is perfect, but because you are no longer depending on others to feel complete. Your sense of self becomes less reactive and more grounded. You are not easily shaken by someone's inconsistency because your foundation is no longer built on their behavior. As you continue in this direction, your standards naturally rise. Not in a way that pushes people away, but in a way that protects your well-being. You become more selective with your time, more intentional with your energy, and more aware of what you allow into your life. This is not about becoming distant. It is about becoming aligned. And within that alignment, there is a quiet transformation. You begin to attract different experiences, different interactions, and different dynamics. Not because you are trying to control anything, but because you are no longer available for what does not respect your value. And so, everything comes back to this one quiet truth. The moment you realize they don't value you is not a moment meant to break you. It is a moment meant to awaken you. It is not there to make you feel small, but to remind you of how much you have been lowering yourself to be accepted. It is not there to create bitterness, but to bring clarity, clear enough for you to finally see what you have been ignoring for so long. You begin to understand that not every connection is meant to be kept, no matter how much you once cared. You begin to see that holding on to the wrong people only delays your connection with the right ones, including the relationship you have with yourself. There is a quiet strength in letting go without anger. There is a deeper power in choosing peace over attachment. And there is true freedom in no longer needing to be valued by those who cannot see you. From this place, you move differently, not with fear, but with awareness, not with need, but with self-respect. You stop asking, why don't they value me? And you start asking, why did I stay where I wasn't valued? And in that question, you find your growth. Because the truth is, the moment you choose yourself, you close the door to everything that once made you feel less than who you are. And you step quietly but powerfully into a life where your presence is not questioned but recognized.